Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Skip Conover, and I'm one of the founders of the Wisdom Path Colloquium, along with my partner, Tim Holmes. And we've been looking forward to hearing from Dr. Jorge Ferrer for quite a while. I think my Spanish is atrocious, so I don't claim that I pronounced your name properly, Dr. Ferrer. But anyway, Jorge Ferrer is professor of East-West psychology at the California Institute of Integral Studies. He is the author of Revisioning Transpersonal Theory, a Participatory Vision of Human Spirituality, and co-editor with Jacob Sherman of the Participatory Turn, Spirituality, Mysticism, Religious Studies, both also published by SUNY Press. But today we've focused for our preparation on participation and the mystery. And so without further ado, let me, Dr. Ferrer has asked that we have a conversation rather than a big presentation from him. So he's going to make an introductory remarks, and then we'll be able to converse on various topics. And so Dr. Ferrer, please go ahead. And I'm going to put you on speaker view on my computer, which will control the YouTube video.
Thank you much. Thank you very much, Skip. And thank you, everybody who is here. I know some of you are in very early morning time zones. It's here in Spain, 7 p.m. So I know that for some of you, it's like an effort to be here. So I really want to appreciate that. And please, from now on, I would rather prefer you call me Jorge. And I just want to say, too, that I no longer teach at CIS. I resigned a few months ago to devote the rest of my life to more closely working in the healing and transformation of people and communities away from academic matters, even though I will still be writing books and writing things. So that being said, I asked Skip if it was okay to start this talk just kind of sharing with you about the personal roots of my interest in transpersonal psychology, because I think it's important so that we start getting to know each other. Of course, I would love to know about all of you stories of interest into spirituality, Jungian studies, and so forth. But since I'm here, like in a special role, I'll start, and maybe later we can you can share too. So I would say that when I was kind of like in my early childhood, like probably like 10, 11 years old, I started having some kind of anomalous experiences. And I think that's pretty common for many of the people like you who are later become interested in the spirituality. And those anomalous experiences were kind of like I was in the classroom and I would go into some kind of like trance. Everything around me with my eyes open would disappear. I would just see light, very white light. I would find myself in a place of tremendous peace and happiness. Every single time that the teacher, of course, my students would notice my face, they would laugh. I couldn't hear anything. And when my teacher kind of woke me up, I would cry. I would cry and cry. They took me to the psychologist. They talked with my parents. They were concerned about me having epileptic seizures, epileptic spells, and that wasn't the case. There was no sign of that. And that happened, and it was like a memory. And then many years later, like in my early adolescence, I started having what is being called out-of-body experiences. Probably many of you have had some of those. Normally they start in that liminal place in between wakeful consciousness and sleep consciousness. And needless to say, at that age, I had no knowledge of psychology and even less of out-of-body experiences. They were pretty scary. It was not something I was looking for. Was coming out of my body, very hard to navigate. I was afraid I couldn't come back to my body. Over the years, I had less and less, but actually they were much more easily easy to navigate them, and I could actually control what is being called in some traditions the astral body. And there's many interpretations. Some people, of course, Susan Blakemore and many others think that all these things happen within the brain. Other people think that they're actually happening outside the brain, and they can access veridical information. My sense of the studying the literature is that the veridic is out still. There is no compelling evidence in either direction. But in any case, it was those experiences that later on, together with my increasing awareness of certain kind of neuroses and energetic blocks that I was experiencing in my early adulthood, that took me to the study of psychology. So basically, when I signed for psychology, I was looking for healing from those neuroses, from those energetic blocks I was experiencing also around my sexuality and other areas, and also for understanding of those experiences I had as a child and as an adolescent. Needless to say, those of you, I don't know how many of you, maybe you can raise your hand, how many of you actually study psychology at the university, like in a mainstream university? Few of you, okay. So yeah, okay, like 4 or 5 of you. Okay, another one. So needless to say, like the psychology I encountered at the University of Barcelona was dominated by this kind of like more cognitive, behavioral, but also neuroscientific paradigm. And those experiences were consistently pathologized, right? So those trances were pathologized. The out-of-body experiences were, depersonalization, was kind of dissociation, was kind of like, but for me, there was something like I couldn't buy that experience that I had as a child. It left a memory of like tremendous joy and peace. There was something fundamentally good about that experience that I couldn't believe. So I started like this many years long, like a search for understanding more through self-reading. So I always say that I study mainstream psychology at the university, and I had my own career of psychology that I was studying on my own. And that's how I came up with the transpersonal psychology after some years of reading. Went through Freud collected works, and then Eric Fromm. It was Eric Fromm, my bridge to the transpersonal. And I'm saying this because I know that this is a Jungian group. And actually for most psychologists, Western psychologists, the bridge to transpersonal was Jung, right? But for me, it was Eric Fromm. In particular was the book Eric Fromm and Suzuki and DiMartino on Zen and psychoanalysis. And I started to study Zen. I started studying, involving into experimenting with the states of consciousness in different ways, meditation, and also some substances and kind of like entheogens. And then during that time, I found this book, one of the first anthologies ever written on transpersonal psychology by Roger Walsh and Francis Bong. I think it was called Paths Beyond Ego. It's kind of a bit passé today, but it was like a good one. And there I found finally like what I found, it was like a psychology, a real psychology, a psychology of the soul, right? A psychology that was not only not pathologizing those states, but actually was even suggesting that perhaps some of those states had to do with further reaches of human nature, right? Even higher states of consciousness, or perhaps even some of these experiences were even involving like what they were connecting them with some of the potentials of human nature, like the siddhis, right, in the Eastern traditions, like the astral body and so forth. So for me, was like a revelation. It's a revelation, and I was the only one knowing about transpersonal psychology in Barcelona at that time. We're talking in the late 80s, mid 80s, and it took me many years to get to California. I found that it was in California where all the fathers of this discipline, unfortunately, they were fathers only, they were only men, Grof, Maslow, Sutik, and a few others have created this discipline. And I found it's like, I really want to go there to study. It took me years to get a fellowship from a cultural foundation in Spain, and I arrived to the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco in 1993 to get my PhD there. The same year that Stanislav Grof arrived to the Institute and Richard Tarnas arrived to the Institute. So both of them, they became like some of my closer mentors, especially Richard Tarnas. even though I knew Stan Groves were much better, it finally was Rick Tarnas who became my closer mentor, and he kindly wrote the foreword of my first book. So that's a little of the story. Once there, like I started teaching in part to pay my fees, my bills, and also in part because I really love to teach, and I really found it very rewarding to be in academia and like to work with the students and to have a life of inquiry and dialogue as the kind of inquiries and dialogues that I think you have here. So that's why I feel also much more comfortable with the conversational style, even though I'm speaking now a lot by myself. So I'm gonna shut up now and I'm gonna already open into your questions. Thanks for your attention.
Thanks, Jorge. I guess the first questions which have to come up are, first of all, what is the mystery? How do you define the mystery? And after that, how do you define participation and the mystery?
Yes, yes.
I know you've written a whole book on this, but
you know, I just want to say, like, I'm not, even though, you know, I could be a bit analytical in my writing or very analytical at times. I'm not like a super good friend of definitions because it tends to constrain versus like, but my understanding, I would say, my understanding of the mystery is like, you know, I think there are many things we can doubt about life, about reality, about everything. And you study philosophy, you really can see like almost everything can be doubted. But I believe there are three things that are hard to question. One thing is that there is something rather than nothing. We're here now.
Sure.
And the second thing is that this something is changing. It's in a creative unfolding. It's not static. We're having a conversation. You know, leaves are falling. As I look at my window here, you know, there is like we have now a history, a good story of the universe. You know, from the Big Bang and probably from before the Big Bang. You know, we're inquiring into that as well. So there's something that has been a creative unfolding through you know, billions actually of years, you know. And the third thing is that we are part of that thing that is evolving. We're participating in that creative unfolding. We are not separated from the cosmos or from life or from anything else. So what I call the mystery is like that force that is behind the whole creative unfolding of the cosmos and of reality and leading also to life and to ultimately to self-conscious human beings. My really good friend and colleague, Brian Swim, is a cosmologist. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's like a award winner documentarist for his documentary, The Journey of the Universe or The Adventure of the Universe. I highly recommend it. Yeah. He tends to say very famously, he's like, you know, the great discovery of modern science and cosmology is the following. You leave hydrogen gas by itself for a long time, and somehow it becomes giraffes, rose petals, and self-conscious human beings. So that force, that energy, that whatever we want to call it, that makes this kind of like creative unfolding is what I call the mystery.
Okay, thank you. I recall having studied Jung for about 20 years, and then I made some comment on Facebook, and they said, somebody responded, "You mean transpersonal?" And I still am trying to figure out what transpersonal is about. So maybe you could also comment on that.
Yes. Yeah, it has been a very contested term. I don't know how much you are familiar with, you know, classical and contemporary inner debates in the transpersonal field. But you know, every few years there is like kind of like attempts to define transpersonal, and also some people saying we should change the term. And I don't know. originally transpersonal was understood as it came from, we need to understand how the transpersonal movement was born. It was born in the late 60s, and this is important because it was a time of the counterculture of the 60s. Was the convergence of the counterculture of the 60s with all the entheogenic psychedelic experimentation on the one hand, and also kind of like the depth psychological tradition, especially Jungian and depth psychology, and also humanistic psychology. Transpersonal hasn't been born. And then like the coming into the West of like Eastern teachers, talking about meditation, higher states of consciousness, and so forth. So it was like this convergence of those three trends that many of the people who were kind of experimenting with psychedelics, they were also reading like, Jorge and Trumpa and like Ram Dass later on, and some of these kind of like spiritual teachers who were coming from the East, and they were realizing like a lot of correspondences. It's like, wow, this is this is what I'm kind of experimenting, what this guy is describing, that it took him like for many decades to achieve through meditation. So it was like this corresponds that as like start people realizing like, well, there is in many of these states, like both meditative and also psychedelic, and also sometimes spontaneous, in which a person can feel that his or her identity is far wider than what we have been told who we are, like like a psychobiosocial being, with a biographical story, and like what Alan Watts called I think he called it like the skin encapsulated ego, right? That mental ego that I feel identified with and our bodies, So people who are having experience of expansion of consciousness, feeling identified, for example, with nature or the totality of Gaia, or even the entire cosmos, like the experience of cosmic consciousness, Richard Maurice Bucky spoke about that. But one of the things is like with those early understandings, and this is one of the things I try to revise in my first book, is that they were talking about the transpersonal as experiences. So they were talking about the transpersonal as these experiences, this I have, like there was a subject and I have these experiences of this whatever, what I encountered, and in that way they were kind of perpetuating like this kind of more Cartesian objectivist epistemology that the transpersonal movement from the beginning was trying to debunk or trying to question, So one of the revisions I made and is that for me, like the transpersonal is not so much an experience, but it's like an event. Transpersonal is an event that is co-determined by multiple factors, and your subjectivity is one, what you encounter is other, but it's a process of mutual transformation. So I'll give you an example to bring this point home. And many people have experiences of like, for example, like taking mushrooms or spending a lot of time in nature, in vision quest, and through many other ways, through eco-psychological practices, for example, they have experiences of like suddenly like they realize, nature has an aliveness and if you wish, like an interiority and an anima, a soulfulness that normally in our normal state of consciousness we cannot discern or access so well. And normally the traditional interpretation is like, okay, because I changed my consciousness, now kind of like I see that there, right? But what I was saying is like an event is something that is both, is mutual. It's like through our change of consciousness, like what we encounter also undergoes a transformation, and vice versa. Whatever is we're encountering, this kind of like new part of nature also kind of like has an impact in our consciousness. So that's a small revision I made many years ago, but I'm not too attached to that. I think it's still very fine to talk about transpersonal experiences and transpersonal states, and I think that's but it would be also the last thing I'll say is that it wouldn't be only because transpersonal originally meant beyond the personal, right? Trans. But as Richard Tarnas wrote in the foreword of my book, and also like I was pushing in my first book, it's also, trans also means through, not only beyond, means through. It's through the human being, so it's through the personhood, And of course, like when we are like this kind of more Cartesian ego, like this mental ego kind of disconnected from our body, disconnected from our primary energy, it's normal that we experience, the sacred or all these things as something beyond us. But the more porous, the more permeable our whole organism is to, different sources of life, and different sources in the cosmos, then are things that happen also through us. We're connected through us, through our bodies, through our hearts, through the totality of who we are.
Great. I'm going to start introducing questions of others first. Please. Now. And so Miles Flag, you're the next. So go ahead.
Thank you, Skip, and thank you, Jorge. My name is Miles, and I'm in Canada. To say a little bit about my childhood, I remember, a vivid memory of being a little kid exploring a ravine near where I lived up in Edmonton, which is in almost northern Alberta, and just being on this probably little animal trail through aspen trees, and just vivid memory of the light coming through the yellow leaves of fall in these aspen trees. And so that's a numinous childhood experience, a good one. But then I also have memories that are very negative. And one I was just sharing with my family, because I think it's an important story. And that was remembering when I was maybe just a kid of 8, 9 years old, second season of playing Little League baseball. And probably on the second or third practice, I just went to the practice and I quit, and then came home, walked home and told my father, who was attending to plants in a planter box under the front window, and I said I had quit. And he was disappointed, I could see, but he didn't say, oh, you can't quit, but I did. So I quit, and I sort of always felt like a quitter since then. And when I started studying civil engineering, it was remembering back to feeling like a quitter that I persevered, even though there's a lot of people in first year quitting around me. And, I sort of thought, well, I don't know if this is what I'm supposed to be, but I pushed through. And I wouldn't say that I'm no longer a professional engineer. And anyway, just to summarize, and when it comes to transpersonal, I'm of the opinion that although I'm not a really imaginative person and that I don't go into meditation, everything is revelation. Like even what we're doing right now, what Skip has provided me is revelation. And I didn't know a thing about Jung, and I didn't know anything about the difference between logos and eros until I met Skip. But anyway, with having said all that, I guess the question is, is not just every moment revelation from the collective unconscious if we pause long enough to take it in.
Thank you Miles, for sharing all those early childhood experience. I really appreciate you giving us that background. And my answer would be yes. I would say yes. And I would say that if we human beings were kind of like, like fully integrated and fully open, fully connected, to all the, both like, the realms of consciousness, realms of life energy that surround us, in a ways like, of course, like we all know this from also neuroscience and science, our brain was evolutionarily designed to survive in this physical world, right? But that doesn't mean that what we see is just the only thing that exists. And many times these different technologies of consciousness can really kind of like open the zoom, right? This is like, it's called the funnel theory of consciousness, from Ferrer to Aldous Huxley to Jeffrey Kripal today. They're pushing from this, and many neuroscientists would agree with that. So in a way, it's like, yes, if we were like kind of like all open, would be revelation all the time. The question is, would that be functional, right, for for everyday life? My sense is that there is ways in which we can come every time closer, and I think as a human, as a species, we're still giving baby steps in spiritual evolution, and like evolution of like a fully embodied integrative spirituality. We have like you know, like a few thousand years of kind of religions and spirituality, perhaps more with indigenous, you know. But if you look at the history of religious traditions, you know, many of them, they were not super integrative, you know. They were into the business of a lot of dissociation and repression and you know, what I call a heart chakra up spirituality, right? And a spirituality that cultivates the higher values of the heart, equanimity and compassion, and also states of consciousness, but also kind of tends to control or repress or say it's a pitfall or even demonize as sinful, like the body, sexuality, and the more lower chakras, right? And the pity of that is that it's very often through all those lower chakras that we connect with the energy of life, you know, with where we can become like that kind of luminosity of nature, you know, also can be experienced through our bodies, you know. And so I think there is a way we can really walk towards, in a way, of course, intellectually, I totally agree with you. Everything is revelation all the time. Every microsecond is something unfolding here. Is that mystery is unfolding, something rising and falling from where, and what's holding, right? That's the revelation, right? That's amazing, you know. But one thing is to have like the intellectual understanding that I'm now conveying, and I have another is when you have an experience in which you fully feel that, like in the totality of your being, right? In your heart, in your consciousness, in your body, you know, like you feel completely interconnected and your heart fully open and your consciousness like really, and I think that's beautiful. And I wonder, like, could we function in life if we were experimenting that all the time, right? And that's my sense is that we're moving in that direction, and we are building little by little, you know, structures, inner structures, egoic structures, psychological structures, emotional structures, to hold more and channel constructively more and more of that overwhelming life, overwhelming mystery, you know. But I think it's going to take time for us as species to be there and still function in the world. Makes sense?
Yeah.
Yes, it does. And thank you very much. And I must say, my dissonance, even though I still have a tremendous amount of dissonance I still am working on, but it's been very much mitigated by encountering Skip and Jung and you know, what you're talking about today. So thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Miles.
So before I get to the panel, because I'm trying to honor the order in which questions have arisen, there's one on YouTube from Hannah, who says, I'd like to ask Dr. Ferrer a question. In Jungian psychology, there's an openness that is heavily judged in, for example, Freudianism. Jungian psychology allows both spirituality, but also religious elements to come forth, although I do perceive a lack of cultural integration in the Jungian tradition. For example, the archetypes, how applicable are they throughout both the individualistic and collectivistical cultures, albeit Jung never intended to create a technique or fellow Jungians. I still wonder of the cultural understanding and integration even amongst different spiritual categories, realms. Do you perceive a cultural hierarchy within spiritual understanding / teachings, at its extreme, some kind of elitism? What is to be considered to be allowed and what not? Also, cultural view on this. Another question, even though trans means beyond, do you see postmodernism limiting spirituality when political forces penetrate the transparency psychology and transpersonal psychology, and what implications that may have? That's probably a question that's good for about an hour.
Maybe I'll focus on the first part on Jung and culture. If I understand well the question, and if not, I may take in a slightly different direction. Hopefully, we'll address the question. Like, I think it's important to realize. Well, let me just self-disclosure. I'm no expert in Jung. I've read my Jung many years ago, and I've read many books on Jung. And because I was in the teaching, and also I was chairing at some point the Department of East-West Psychology. I was in particular, I read all of Jung's writings on the East, for example, so I think that address goes in the direction of the question. Like, I think it's important to realize that Jung was a pioneer in so many different ways. And that said, like, from a contemporary perspective, it's like, very few of his interpretations, for example, of Eastern traditions, contemporary Buddhologists or Indologists or Taoist people would agree with. He has been accused of many things. I think it's problematic in a way. It's like, Owen Barfield talked about this kind of historical snobism, about like critiquing people in the past, in their context for not getting it right. It's like, hello, I mean, at that point, what he was doing was just, huge breakthrough for our culture and also for psychology itself, for our discipline, right, of psychology. But it is true that in a way, like he went to the East, he went through to encounter other cultures, always trying to corroborate his own intuitions about the archetypes, the collective unconscious and stuff. Like, his reading of the Bardo Tudol, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, he had to read it the other way around, also his readings on alchemy, Taoist alchemy, and a few other things. There is like many books on Jung and the East, and I think also this connects with his perhaps lack of understanding of what Hannah was referring to, the collective self, right? That you can find more like in India and Japan, for example. There's a wonderful book called Searching for the Self in India and Japan. And it's a different kind of like selfhood. I don't think Jung have a full, total grasp of that. And, and in a way, like, I think all this is connected with his advice to Westerners to not practice yoga, Indian yoga, or not practice Eastern meditation. He was very adamant that we need to find resources for our spirituality in our own Western tradition. And I think he was into something in the way that it's very important indeed for the West to really rescue, and that's what he was doing in so many ways, rescue like the richness, of like the Western metaphysical tradition. He gave us like this incredible like commentary of it in psychological terms, even though of course all the scholars that have studied his movement and his it's very clear that in his inner circle, it seems to be, from what I understand, he was much more bold about his metaphysical and spiritual beliefs that when he was interviewed in a TV program, right? So anyway, I don't know. I think this probably addressed some of her question, hopefully in a minimally satisfying way. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, Jorge. Patricia Flores on our panel, but she wishes to remain silent, said, I have a question. PhD Gary Nolan has found that most people with psychic experiences or abilities have their caudate putamen part of the brain, with some differences from people who don't. Some even talk about schizophrenics being psychics out of control. I wonder if Dr. Ferrer can comment about this. Could it be that there is a genetic factor for this kind of experience?
Well, definitively, and this was the traditional psychiatric view for many decades. That anything kind of anomalous was kind of like defective was caused by some kind of like brain defect, and also there's another author, Persinger, very famous for developing a theory of mystical states, like based on kind of like some brain anomalies and so forth. I would say like my sense is like it is definitely quite possible that some people with certain kind of like brain anomalies or even certain psychopathologies, like can access more easily like psychic and even spiritual and mystical states. After all, like most schizophrenic, of the type of schizophrenia that we're more familiar with, the kind of like more, visionary and like, a lot of the stories, a lot of the messages, a lot of the contents are very mystical and spiritual in nature. People think that I'm the Messiah, or like I'm being chosen for a mission, and I'm in contact with Jesus and so forth. We need to remember here also the famous sentence by, I think it was by Joseph Campbell, and R.D. Laing later popularized it in the anti-psychiatric movement. Like he said something, I think it was Joseph Campbell originally, it's like, the mystic is swimming in the waters in which the crazy, the schizophrenic is drawing. And I think that's the line of response for me. Is like, for me, like, I don't, even if we find, let's say, hypothetically, even if we find that, as this research is suggesting, I'm not familiar with the research in per se, that all the people with psychic abilities have some kind of like a brain difference. How to interpret that brain difference is a different question. We can interpret that brain difference as something pathological. We can interpret that brain difference as something, a kind of like a mutation that is giving people access to actually, psychic powers, like in an evolutionary way, So there is no data without interpretation. That's part of the philosophy of science, right? So how to interpret that is an open question, But for me, the most important, and this is what transpersonal psychology has brought some clarity with all this, it's not so much, is there a brain defect or not, or what's going on? It's like, how is the actual experience of people? Are people who are living that really functional in their lives and like rational and like actually they are making use of these things in ways, or it's like people who are, are terrorized, they cannot control the hallucinations. And of course, here this is very tricky because there's a huge gray line between psychopathology and mysticism, we all know, probably biographies of many mystics, even some very consecrated ones who, they relate experiences that they look pretty challenging, So the spiritual path is not just, full of flowers and fireworks, that could be very challenging twist, and that could be an state in a genuine like spiritual regeneration of a person, but some people can get stuck there. And this is also another concept that was brought by Stanislav Grof and Christina Grof, the concept of a spiritual emergency, how some people is going through a actual spiritual unfolding, but then they get stuck in some place. And then they find, psychiatrists, mainstream psychologists and psychiatrists, and they get medicated, and they get sometimes, closed down in a psychiatric institution, and that's really very sad and tragic. So, so thank you. Thanks for your question. Very, 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 very stimulating. We could go in so many directions here.
Sure. Okay, now retired psychiatrist John Jackson has a question. John, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Skip, and Jorge, thank you. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I think for me, I did have some young childhood experiences, but I think the defining thing for me were, to use your word, the anomalous experiences that I had during the counterculture days, which were defining, and I've always remembered what it is that I saw and what I experienced. Now, it took me a while to realize it, but later in life, I realized that I have judged everything else according to that. And, I've tried a lot of different paths in my life, spiritual, non-spiritual, whatever. Nothing has worked when it was somebody else's path, which left me with the only option really of following my path, which I would say, I describe it, and a lot of people don't get this, but I'm a mystical atheist, basically. And that is the path that I have had to walk. So when I see in your work about diversity and pluralism, that immediately appeals to me. And one of the things I liked the best was one of the videos you did with Jeffrey Mishlove, where you were talking about the perennial philosophy, and he related the well-known story of all of the mystical teachers examining different parts of the elephant, not realizing they were all looking at the same thing. And then he looked at you and said, but what you're saying is there is no elephant. And you said, yes, there's a root, but there is no elephant. I wonder if you could elaborate a little more on that.
Yes. Yes, I would be happy to. Thank you, John, very much for your question. Yeah, what I meant by there is no elephant is that that image that we can find it both in the Sufi tradition and also in some Hindu schools, like it's an image that assumes that spiritual reality has like an objective structure, right? It has a trunk, it has like a tail, it has like these legs, you know, and that the different traditions are just like kind of like having like accessing one part of it. And that for me is very problematic. It's kind of like projecting on the spiritual realm or whatever it is, our already obsolete views of nature and this physical reality, you know, that even those views about this objective reality out here, you know, they have been questioned by philosophers of science and philosophers of mind for many, many decades, you know. So, so this is what I meant, that there is no elephant. But what I didn't mean to say is that there is not something that we can encounter in those states. But what we encounter, I don't think has this kind of objective reality that perennialism insists upon. And of course, once we hypothesize that there is something objective, like has like certain form, whatever it is, then there will be always certain traditions like telling us that they have like a greater access to that or greater pieces of the cake. So right, and then you have the problems of all the hierarchies and all the kind of religious wars, and this is part of what my work tried to kind of like stop. I think it's very actually like very sad, and you know, there is a lot of religious violence in the world, and of course mostly it's caused by other reasons like economic, ethnic, and so forth. But you know, the logic of religious exclusivism has been identified as fueling the psychic attitudes of those people who go to religious wars and also they kill themselves. You know, it's also much easier to kill your neighbor when you think you have got on your side, right? And your neighbor don't. So there is really practical implications for this kind of perspectives, you know, and this dismantling these hierarchies, you know, from the spiritual objective traditions, you know. So yeah, I mean, there is much more. We could talk about perennialism, of course, but my sense is like, you know, the way I see a spiritual unfolding, that yeah, I see it more like, you know, it's like the tree of life, right? It's like imagine a tree, like, and you know, the trunk is the human species, you know, and it goes in different directions, like the Buddhist and Christianity and indigenous, and some of the branches may overlap. You know, there are indeed similarities among many religious traditions, but this whole idea that all religious traditions need to converge into some single ultimate, you know, that only the perennialists know about, and therefore, from that perspective, they can really look down and relativize their traditions. I think this is spiritual elitism, and of course, most religious traditions have done that. They think they have the greater truth or the only truth, and then they dismiss other traditions. This has been changing in the last century with interreligious dialogue. There's many people engaged with a different attitude, but still is the quite prevalent view, you know, in the world. You know, all religious practitioners, they believe the religious truth is the greater. And when you change the image, you know, of you know, another of the common images is like there are different pathways leading to the same peak of the mountain, right? The different traditions are different pathways, but the peak of the mountain is the same. What we have been like observing both in the interreligious dialogue, in the field of comparative mysticism, in the phenomenology of religion, is that very likely there is not just one mountain and one peak. There are many mountains and many peaks. Different traditions are really kind of unfolding different human potentials, you know, and some of them are better than others in certain things. I think Buddhist practitioners are great at contemplation, and indigenous people at psychic healing and relationship with nature. Christian people, I think they're better than many others about charity and social action and so forth. So that's what I'm calling. I'm calling let's stop this spiritual narcissism, about my tradition is just the greatest of all, or the greatest truth, and let's focus on what we can really cross-fertilize, cross-pollinize each other. We can sort of become more complete human beings and more complete traditions.
Great. Thank you. Jerome Waddle is next.
Well, thank you, Jorge. You just take me back to my childhood in the numinous world, and then that left. And then I was fortunate enough to meet Stanislav Grof and Christina Grof back in 1985. And I attended one of their workshops. And at that time, Christina was just establishing the spiritual emergency network at that time. And so, but I went through the workshop, and it was just outstanding in terms of the experience that we went through. And it recreated that same feeling and same luminosity and love, and just everything was just wonderful. So it was a definitely wonderful experience. And at the end of that, we did mandalas. So we would draw out and discuss with each other what had come up and with different exercises. And of course, he's using the holotropic breathing, which is because I don't do drugs, but he had found out he could use his process of meditation and a little hypnosis and music to create the state in order to enter to that in-between state where you could work and so forth. But and then one of the things that in your book, you were talking about some of the difference in the transpersonal psychology back then and what you're recommending today. But I partnered that with Zen, and I had a clinical psychologist, and we went through, we did Kundalini yoga, we did Aikido. So we went through the whole mixture of the Oriental things. But we were able to, basically the value was in Gestalt therapy. In terms of being able to get out what the blockage was and bring it up to the consciousness state and resolve that. But that was my journey. But the question I had was when Becky Tarnas, I know, talked about the Owen Barfield's original participation and final participation. And could you explain a little bit about, I understand we cannot get back to the original participation, which would be kind of akin to the perennial philosophy. Whereas in today, in our modern world, we can experience the final participation, which is we're aware of that aspect at the same time, rather than being sunk down into it. I'm just trying to clarify in my mind the experience.
Yes. What I understand of Owen Barfield is that he would speak as of three stages, in participatory unfolding in through human beings. So one, the original participation, in which he would relate archaic indigenous people, archaic primitive peoples. Not necessarily. I don't think contemporary indigenous people are that, but he was the archaic, in which you're just participating in everything, but there is not kind of conscious of that participation, and therefore there is not a sense of being able to kind of consciously, intentionally, creatively kind of participate, and then he would say with modernity and science and the whole kind of scientific objectivist paradigm is we have lost the sense of participation. That is also the disenchantment of the cosmos, we're just these beings, with these minds in this kind of dead universe, and like that's kind of, and then what he was calling for, that I think is completely aligned with, contemporary participatory thinking. I consider Owen Barfield one of the pioneers of participatory thinking in the 20th century. Is like this more like he would call it, I think, final participation or future participation, and he would say like, well, that's what we're hitting, that's what we can access, and I think that is what this kind of participatory paradigm in transpersonal psychology is trying to enact in a way to bring forth in conversation with contemporary spirituality, with contemporary interests, with a very complex reality that we live in these days, But the idea is exactly that: is that you can actually like become aware of this kind of participatory predicament that I was referring to before, and then therefore make conscious, intentional choices. And that's also where ethics come in, where ethics come in, because if the universe is participatory, as even Wheeler and some of the physicists spoke about, if our reality is participatory in many different ways, therefore the actions that we make, the way we participate matters. And that's why in my work I also bring this kind of normative dimension. I talk like very often that it's pointless to compare spiritual traditions about like about the states of consciousness, if one is non-dual or is theistic or is psychic visionary or is like ecstatic mysticism. For me that's not important. The important is like how are transforming ourselves? Are we becoming less self-centered, less selfish, more available to others? Are we becoming more sensitive to social injustice and ecological disaster? Are we becoming more integrated human beings? I think that's what really matters. The rest is kind of like interesting, but it's not really the point. That makes sense.
Yeah, very. Thank you very much. Oh.
Thank you. Okay, Jordan Haggard is next.
Thank you, Jorge. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be here. I really appreciate it. And John said that perfectly. I was struck by when you bring up the emic, the interior, in such a wonderful way that's beautifully in such stark contrast to the anemic, creative and spiritual peace in society. And then as you further, bypass the spiritual elitism, you get more to pluralism. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks' work with Dignity of Difference just seemed to sing there, where you're really advocating for basically, be yourself, or as Oscar Wilde would say, be yourself. I hear everyone else is taken. And I would ask, you mentioned the community work you've moved to after resigning from the previous post. From your perspective, deep into this, what can we each or as groups do to further enact and support, like gardeners in the world, to bring perennials in the garden, but not the perennialism? What can we do? And I think, what can we do in culture, in society, in our own communities, small and large, from your perspective, to enact and promote, I think, reinforce and enhance and strengthen this so that we do our part? I guess the simple piece: how can we amend the soil in the garden? How can we nourish the soil for others to discover this directly, instead of just in the group like this? But what can we do outside of this from your perspective?
Thank you very much, Jordan. Like I think the piece of community, I think, is very important. Even before leaving CIS and living in California, I lived in a community for almost 10 years. I co-founded that community, was in Berkeley. And there is something about community life that I would say is crucial in this transformation. In a way, like the whole way life and culture is organized around the so-called nuclear family, it's kind of like an invention of like capitalist culture. Everyone needs a fridge, everyone needs a TV, everyone needs something, and in a way it's an ecological disaster. Everybody's producing much more garbage at the same time, and much more disposal. And so I would say like really a call. Some people have made calls for retribalizing, or like, but definitively. Call for community. Like I right now, as I'm speaking from a community house. I moved also to here to Visa because there was a beautiful community house, an artist who have a garden outside. We're doing our gardening, and so I think that's really a big piece. Is like, and it's a tricky one because we haven't calculated, we haven't conditioned so much by our culture to value so much our privacy, our individualism, right? It's almost like sacrosanct. It's like, wow, living with others, unless they are like my family or like my body, it's like, whoa, it's like almost like people get like, and I think we need to get over that. We need to understand that we come from hundreds of thousands of years of living together in groups, and tribes, and this is also fundamental for child raising, like the amount of like genuine loving parents that they get their love suffocated because of the pressure and stress of raising one or two kids in a nuclear family situation, and that love gets drawn, like this stress, and all this also reaches the children. This about the new generation, like it became like very apparent to me. Like if you indulge me, I'll just tell a very brief personal anecdote. When I was living in that community in Berkeley, 5 years into it, a child was born there. Was natural birth. Ishel Marie was her name, beautiful child. And a few years later, when she was 5 years old, the parents had to explain her that we had to leave the house because the house sold out. The owner had to sell the house to pay medical bills in the States. And so the first thing that she said was like, well, but we're all moving together, right? And the second thing that she said is like, because I don't want to live by myself with you too. So that kind of really imprinted in me very strongly, like the sense is like for children, for kids, to live with many others, the value, the richness is a no-brainer, It's like, and developmental psychologists have studied that too, the impact of having different reference of masculinity, of femininity, and of course, even more children. It's wonderful, like as the Hillary Clinton wrote in that book, it was an old saying, we don't even know where it comes from. It takes a village, to raise a kid, So I think there is, could go in many more different directions, but and of course there is a whole dimension of social political activism, right? I was for many years involved in like spiritual social engagement, with the Buddhist social engagement and the Buddhist Peace Fellowship in the States, So like activists, social criticism, like through writing or through service or through, there is so much to do, so definitely call also for action there too. But living in community is like already like revolutionary.
Thank you for such an enriched response. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
thank you very much, Jordan.
Now, our friend artist Colleen Kibert has a couple of questions here on the chat. Unfolding creativity. Would you comment on the process of that unfolding? And she also says personality types, Myers-Briggs, etc. In what way does personality what does it have to do with availability to engage in transpersonal experience? We have you muted at the moment, sir.
Could you repeat the last sentence? I got the first part about the unfolding creativity, but about the typology.
The typology was in what way does personality have to do with availability to engage in transpersonal experience?
Okay, that's great. Well, in terms of the first question, I think there are many possible directions to engage that question. Like one that is just coming to me in this moment is like is in terms of what in my work all about intrapersonal spiritual co-creation, and I find that really important. Like the idea that we're kind of like co-creating with that mystery, and but through the totality of our being. In a way, we could say, like in the same way that through our most primary instinctive energy, like our sexuality too, we can create another human life, right? It's the miracle of life. It's through that energy. In a ways, I see it like the part of that creativity of that mystery, like comes as life energy in the human being. But very often, when this energy needs to go through a process of gestation and transformation within the person, until little by little, after being rooted like a plant in the soil, being rooted in the body, going into the dark, so to speak, into the collective unconscious, into the instinctive wisdom, like they start blooming and blooms into your heart as emotions, as feelings, and if the process continues, it kind of like reaches like kind of like insights, new ideas, and this is the genuine creative ideas, because there is different types of creativity. The more normal one is like a mental permutation of already existing ideas. We can all do that. But a process of genuine creativity emerging from that primordial energy of life is what really gives rise to really novel developments in many different ways. And it can really go further into more, contemplative or conscious states, So, and something for me that's why I found it so important to talk about these types of co-creation is like, it is through that engagement of those primary energy that I think we access the most generative, creative dimensions of the mystery, not necessarily through our consciousness. That's an hypothesis. My sense through our consciousness, we access a lot of archetypes and spiritual motifs and cosmologies that have been already enacted in history. But the novel developments, I think, emerge from that engagement of the body, and it's more kind of like primordial energies, and so we could say much more about that, but I want to at least say something about the other part of the question about like the personality types. If I understood well the question, it's like how different personality types interface with that kind of spiritual creativity. I'm a pluralist. You already got that. So I would say that all of them like have their own style of engagement. The introvert, the extrovert, that's one typology. There are many other different typologies. I've worked more with the Enneagram typologies, like 9 different subpersonality types, and I can see like how the different, like all of them have a different channel, a different style of engagement with those spiritual energies. I don't think one is better than the other, although there are different levels of, in each type, different levels of, or frequencies of kind of like more kind of like wholesome or constructive engagement than others. It's not the same someone who is like an hedonist, a number 7 in the Enneagram, an hedonist, more narrow egoic consciousness, but the same number can also access like this more tranquil joy of life, from which you can really kind of engage a life of greater service, less kind of constrained by egoic concerns, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Les Morgan, in fairness, had sent the first set of questions about 6 months ago, and I think some of his original questions have been answered, but he does ask a question on YouTube here, which I should ask you, which is on this point, can you please discuss the problems with perennialism and reductionist thinking in this field?
Yes, I think we already touched upon those a little when engaging another question. I think the main problem of perennialism is like this elitism. It like offers this kind of meta reading of all traditions, of all spiritualities. But it situates itself in a privileged position that only those who go through the kind of esoteric initiations of the traditionalist school can access. So. And the other problem is that when they start describing what is their understanding of this kind of like higher spiritual truth or spiritual cosmology, they invariably do it in terms that are closer to one tradition than others. Fritjof Schuon, who was like the is like the spiritual father of this school. He was very clear, like he'd say, like, well, yes, perennial truth is universal, but Advaita Vedanta has the best description. It's like, wow, imagine what Buddhist practitioners would say about that, right? It's like, well, that's not our truth. And actually there were like some very fascinating conversations between traditionalist authors, Nasser in particular, who's one of the most sophisticated, Hussein Nasser, and like Buddhist scholars like Sally King, and the Buddhist scholars were saying like, well, this is a very interesting cosmology, but has nothing to do with Theravada Buddhism, So don't tell us that this is a universal truth or a perennial truth. It totally excludes our perspective, And of course, we have already also talked about the hierarchies, that creates and some of the ramifications. But I would say then one more that I don't know how many clinicians are here or people who work with people. Like for me, one of the problems I found when I arrived to California, like in the early 90s, is that the field of transpersonal psychology and a lot of spiritual culture were very, very dominated or very influenced by the writings of Ken Wilber. That someone that for many years we had like a lot of discussion, and I learned from him. And also, in a way, we create our work identifying things in the work of others that don't work for us, right? So in a way, I always feel I have a depth of gratitude to Ken, because it was through engagement of his work, in particular in my first book, that I felt like I started kind of creating an alternative, seeing things that didn't work for me. But to the point I was mentioning before, is like in the California of the 90s, many transpersonal clinicians, psychologists had kind of internalized Ken Wilber's hierarchy. So therefore, they were kind of like in their spiritual psychotherapy, spiritual coaching, spiritual counseling, they were kind of like in subtle or gross ways trying to move people through that hierarchy, like from the psychic to the subtle, and subtle to the causal, to the non-dual, right? And they were situating their clients through that lenses, okay, this is a client, okay, this in this step, is in this level, And for me, that's horrific, because it does not honor like really the spiritual individuation, the unique spiritual unfolding of each human being, Not only different traditions like value those states or states of consciousness in different ways, radically different ways, but also you can see if you study the biographies of the different mystics, but also if you talk with your spiritual friends among ourselves, we'll probably have very different spiritual trajectories. So that for me was like a very kind of down-to-earth problematic implication of that perennial thinking. I couldn't go on and on perennialism, but I think I'll leave it here for now. Thank you.
Okay. I have to interject my own question here, since it's on a similar topic. Recently, we had Dr. Jerry Wright talk to us about his book, Mystical Path Less Traveled. And Jerry had been a Presbyterian pastor for 25 years, but he found himself falling off the back of the church, off the back porch of the church, as he said. And so we now engage with one or two pastors who are starting to see the light, and they're trying to understand, for example, why Dr. Jordan Peterson can fill auditoriums around the world with his perspectives about the Bible, and they can't bring people into church. And so I wonder if you have any advice for pastors or priests or rabbis who may be seeing the light in what you're talking about, but who are, basically by their denominations forbidden to talk about them. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I've never thought about that. Thank you. This is what I like about our dialogues, right? That things come your way. It's like, okay, so let's see. I mean, what I would say, maybe two things. One is to for those pastors or rabbis to go, if they haven't gone, to go deeper into the mystical teachings of their own traditions. That's fundamental, I would say, because the one thing is what they have been studying, in the theological seminars and so forth. Another thing is like the more radical mystical teachings, where I would say they would find resources and also legitimation within the traditions, for bringing forth more perhaps heretical spiritual perspectives, and then yes, to have the heretical courage, the heretical courage to bring to their audiences in a skillful way, using a skillful means, and that's like an art, like to bring like perspectives in which they really believe in, like in a way that translates well to their understanding of their audience. And this is part of what skillful means in the Buddhist tradition. The teacher speaks to each student like in a way that can be understood. So I think that's what they would need to get really good at, and I wish them luck. It's not an easy task what they have in front of them.
Wonderful advice. Okay, Gilda Kao is next.
Oh, hello, Dr. Ferrer. My question is, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. We all seem to be trying to find a loci that everyone can embrace. And we're wondering what a loci position that we all can agree upon. And we're wondering what your experience is with dreams, and that we work with dreams after working with many other traditions, and we keep hearing to go deeper, and everyone dreams. So that somehow there's a wealth in allowing dream consciousness to be an everyday word, because it transcends the word to begin with. So therefore it allows for everyone to participate with whatever is arising for them. So I wonder if you can speak about that, and that sometimes I hear that from top down, using the mind to transcend, and then from the bottom up through Kundalini or whatnot. What's your sense about that?
Yeah. I mean, like, of course, I pay attention to my dreams. I had a dream diary for many years, and I share dreams with my friends, and my friends share dreams with when we work with them. But I also say I'm not like an expert in dream work. It's not my area of expertise, so I'm just saying this humbly. My sense definitively, it's like dreams are. It's just an amazing manifestation of unconscious, and not only individual, but also of course collective, and also there are dreams that probably come in even from other sources. I think there are many different types of dreams, right? And for me, the experience I've had in dreams that have impacted me the most have been kind of spiritual dreams in which I would have encounters that would give me like some waking consciousness or transmission of some kind, and also like there is all this phenomenon that lies in between the dream world and the wakeful world, in which there could be like actual encounters with energy beings, that feel you're completely lucid, and it's not lucid dreaming per se, because that's different. It's like you're inside a dream and you wake up within the dream, right? But it's more like you actually your body is completely frozen. I think this is well documented. You cannot move the body. You're completely lucid. You're not fully awake or fully asleep, and then you can have encounters with energy beings, and some of the ones I had were quite transformative, actually. So I think like definitely dream work, if they can, it's a spiritual path in itself, I would say, and it could be a path to transcendence. And it's like this is also part of my spiritual pluralism. It's like I don't think any path is better than any other, universally or for everybody. It's like, I don't care if people are doing dream work or doing meditation or being conscious parents or being social activists. It's like the fruits, it's like the fruits in the transformation, what counts, So I'm not sure how much of this address your concern, but I definitively, value very deeply dream work as an area of transpersonal development and spiritual growth.
Well, thank you. Yes, we find that it includes the macro and the micro. So we're wondering how that could be a point that is shared by many people, more something more common,
right?
Instead of something that is specific to just those who take on dream work as a specialty.
Right. Yeah. We all dream, right?
Even kids love it. I mean, it's something that makes everyone come alive and
Yes.
brings them into the conversation. And
Yes.
it's always original and surprising. So we're wondering, in your experience in the field, if you have found such enthusiasm about this of utilizing dreams as a point of departure.
Yeah, definitely there is transpersonal psychologists and colleagues that they have written on dreams. Like at my own alma mater, my university, CIS, one of my colleagues was Daniel Delorier, and they wrote this book, Integral Dreaming, and he was a lucid dreamer himself. So he had a lot of really beautiful reflections on dreaming, spirituality, and transpersonal psychology, and also integral psychology was also using Ken Wilber's 4 quadrants and so forth. So definitely there is like people in the field like interested in dreams and like who have produced interesting works. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Nancy Pfaff is next. Nancy.
Hello, Jorge.
Hello.
I was thinking of my childhood experience of the numinous, and I would go where I could be alone in nature, and the willows would be up around me, the birds would be singing, the sun would be shining, I would be there alone, and it was as if I just melted into it, and it was all one. And then over the years, I've lost touch with sensuality. And only in recent years has that come back to me. And what interested me in your embodiment spirituality, and you say in a couple of places, page 76, tantric transmutation of sexual energy to attain union, and tantric affirmation of the non-duality of sensual desire and awakening. And you go on in page 8 and 81, the body as mirroring and containing the innermost structure of both the entire universe and the ultimate creative principle, and body as a pinnacle of spirit's creative manifestation overflowing with intrinsic spiritual meaning. And I wonder if you could expand on these things.
Thank you very much for bringing the dimension of embodiment. It's really also part of my contemporary interest, and I offer workshops on embodied spirituality. Actually, I'm having one this coming weekend here, and so I actually work with practices like really like helping people to start making the body more porous to that life energy, that energy of consciousness, so that it becomes more alive and more interconnected to everything. What I would say, as you probably have seen, in my work, I'm not a very universalist thinker. I'm an appreciator of difference. And that said, that teaching of the human body as kind of a microcosmos of the larger cosmos and the ultimate principle, it's a teaching that you find strikingly across tremendous array of traditions, from indigenous to mystical Christianity, to Taoist, to hermetical traditions, to ancient traditions. It's unbelievable, So, and I think that there is something to that, and you know, it's like for me, like when I also read like I read like modern science and cosmology, it's like in a way they're telling you something similar in a different ways. Like they're telling you like the atoms that hydrogen atoms that compose your body. You know, they're like 14 billion years old. Atoms don't age. They're the same atoms that into the Big Bang, and we have them here. You know, so the mystery in that first act of creation, what happened there is inside our bodies, you know, and the other main elements of our bodies like carbon, oxygen, you know, they were created like through the explosion of novas, nova stars, like in the center of the Milky Way, you know. So in a way, like you know, we are, the body is not only like you know, as Carl Sagan would say, like you know, how do you say, like it's like a cosmic dust or something like that. It's also like a bridge for cosmic remembrance, for a bridge to the mystery, you know. And that's part of the work I do. I help people to explore the body, the human body, as a doorway to both the immanent dimension of the mystery and the transcendent dimension of the mystery, you know, to explore our primary energy as like a bridge to that kind of like a primordial energy of creation, you know, to explore our consciousness as like as an opening to those larger, greater knowledge, greater fields of consciousness that may exist in nature or in the cosmos, you know, in an open way, non-dogmatically, of course, like always in the spirit of open-ended inquiry, you know, so that each person find their own truths and resonances, you know. And here sensuality that you mentioned at the beginning, I find is also very, very important, because you know, if any of you, like if we're like in a presential, not through Zoom, and if you, Nancy, would come my way and you would pinch me with a needle, right now, my body would contract. Pain contracts the body, but sensuous pleasure opens the body, relaxes the body, and the body becomes therefore more porous to both that life energy and the energy of consciousness, you know. So I think it's super important, as I wrote in that chapter, to really rescue the spiritual dignity of pleasure and sensuality and sexuality in a non-narcissistic way, you know, to really rescue that dignity, because it has been so, especially in our Western tradition, you know, like a Christian tradition, like there's a baggage there, you know, of like those dimensions are something like this, like the, you know, in medieval times, they, you know, they devoid the divinity from Eros as well. The old mystics, earlier mystics, like for some of the old mystics, like God was Eros. Eros was God, you know. But later on, like God became just something that would only love human beings through agape, right? Agape, but never erotically. And it's like, wow, that's not my God. And of course, like I think our culture is in a process of like also gradually integrating those loves, the erotic and the agape and all those loves. And of course, God, whatever the mystery, whatever term you may want to use, you know, like of course it's a love that is complete. It's not a split, you know. So in some ways also I feel sometimes that through when you are really open into this participatory connection to all those energies, you realize that your own sensuous acts is also sensuous acts of that mystery of the divine, you know. God is loving through us. God is also having sex with us, it's kind of unfolding through all that activity, you know. So it's a resacralization, of course, of sexuality, and also like kind of like bring also a sense of like, you know, mindful responsibility as well, not in a morally narrow way, but in a way that you know, that really, you know, it's like it's connected to life, you know. Sexuality is so connected to life, you know. We all came into the world through a sexual act carried out by our parents. Why, therefore, our culture says that sex is something ugly, or that is something like, if we don't respect our origins, what can we respect? If we don't trust our origins, what can we trust?
Yeah, I had an epiphany as you were speaking there, Jorge, which is that when one goes to a church, it's naturally being in beauty very often. There's something beautiful about it, which then does open us as opposed to being painful. And that's why we open to a religious experience, I suppose, in a traditional sense. Anyway, Jordi Gall has the next question.
Hello?
Yep, we're
Do you
listening.
get me?
Yes.
Jorge and all fellow travelers, my greetings. Jorge, salute from the former Asociación Integral Española, who didn't overcome his fringeness. He died for self-afflicted anemia. But we try hard at some point. I have an assortment of points. I don't want to be distracting, which I think that may be interesting for you, for me, and for the rest of the crew. I'm beginning for the last one. You started doing encephalograms to people meditating back in Barcelona in the Paleolithic or something like that.
What? I don't understand.
You started your career when you were a doctoral student doing electroencephalography to meditators. My point is, what's your vision now of, say, of the applied cognitive sciences, if they have anything to say relevant in the short term for the spiritual quest, so to speak?
Yes, very good. That's good. That's a good question. I think they do. And I think I kind of like more when cognitive scientists or even neuroscientists they enter into dialogue with the spiritual practitioners, and also I like, for example, the Francisco Varela neurophenomenology, in which they are kind of like bringing together like neuroscientific measures contrasting with experience. I think that there is a lot of information there that could be very valuable. The only danger is that many of those researches and research projects, they are kind of like constrained by a very kind of materialistic paradigm that tends to be reductionistic of spiritual experiences to brain processes, but that does not have to be the case at all. It's just an interpretation. So the data themselves that they can produce can be extremely illuminating and helpful and interesting. But I would say I just need to be careful, like, let's not reduce everything to brain processes, no? Yes.
Well, I am following what's being done at Harvard Deaconess Group, which was famous by Benson, say 20 years ago, the relaxation response, or some clever people in Wisconsin. And it doesn't seem to be of much use today yet, maybe. Now, my second point is to say thank you for putting some order on perennialism. I don't want to use my big mouth and discussing the merits and the demerits of Genon, Ebola, and company. But there is a dogmatism there. And there is the question of authority.
Yes.
And some elements of clericalism, of clerisy, if you wish, of subordinating the issue of authority. That's a thank you. The second thank you I want to make public is for your approach to rescue embodiment. You don't mention, but there is an element of grounding as well in embodiment. And perhaps it's time to revisit, say, Wilhelm Reich and successor Pierre Racos, Lowen and company, and put them at the 21st century.
Yes, I totally agree. Like my sense of the most, after being like 23 years in the Bay Area of San Francisco, where a lot of the kind of psychospiritual innovation take place, doesn't mean that doesn't take in other places, but what I've seen like 20 years, like going back and forth from the States, California to Europe to other places, that everything that there's a lot happening there. And my sense is that the most powerful and interesting approaches are those that kind of they integrate contemplation and somatics. you know,
Yeah.
like the body and consciousness, you know, energy and consciousness. They're more holistic, you know, and like, you know, whether it's Hakomi or even approaches to trauma like somatic experiencing, or the work I do with embodied spirituality, and as well as many others, are approaches that have like that interface, you know. And I agree with you that there has been some writings in the transpersonal field in English about the transpersonal Wilhelm Reich, you know, about Reich, and but I think I agree with you, there is a lot to do to not only bring them on, but to revise them in contemporary terms, what they can really offer to spiritual and transpersonal movements. I very much agree.
Thank you.
You mentioned spiritual individuation a while back.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you would just give us an overview of what you mean by spiritual individuation. Of course, Jung, we who have studied Jung are familiar with the idea of individuation in general, but
yes. Well, exactly. It's a term I coined, like actually inspired by Jung, obviously, individuation. But the emphasis I wanted to bring is that in the same way that today most psychologists and most people would, in different languages, would agree with the idea of a psychological individuation, that it's person unfold psychologically their unique self, or who they are, or their unique potentials, and blah blah, you know. But then when you would go to look at the different spiritual traditions, you would see in many of them like a tendency towards homogenization, right? Not only like even physical, like the monks, they are dressed the same, you know, the you know, raise their heart, they raise their head, they're the same. But then also in the sense of like that they are trying to mimic, you know, the spiritual enlightenment of their founder, like in Buddhist, or that state of consciousness that was supposedly revealed through sacred scriptures, you know, like in like in the Vedas and so forth, you know. So in a way, like they're like everybody's trying to get to do the same, you know, and go through. And of course, you have all these different handbooks and manuals of stages in the path, you know, of meditation, stages in the mystical and its tradition. So in a way, there is this homogenization, you know. And I would say, like, I think those manuals and those pathways, they're perfectly fine when you are in that business, when you're in the context of single tradition like Buddhism or Theravada Buddhism, and you really are clear what you want to get is from point A to this point B that is being described in this book, you know. It's perfectly legitimate spiritual endeavor. I don't have any criticism of that when you are clear. But I would say, like, for most contemporary spiritual seekers today, for most contemporary people like engaging in spirituality in a tremendously diverse world, and also that we're also in touch with so many different traditions and spiritual resources and understandings, like it's almost impossible not to in our connected world, you know. It's like all the sacred teachings are translated, most of them is like it's everywhere, you know, like shamanism and ayahuasca and Tibetan Buddhism and mystical, everything is out there, you know. My sense is like with all those references out there, the most important is that each person really pays attention to what's their own spiritual unique unfolding, you know, in conversation with teachers, if you wish, if you want to have some, or mentors or spiritual friends, in conversations with the literature, in conversation with communities, whatever, you know. But ultimately, I think it's important that each person develop their own spiritual authority, their inner spiritual authority, their own really spiritual sense, and from that place, start co-creating a spiritual path that is not different in my experience than your life. Right? Your life, you know, in the life that you know. Let me put this in a different way. Like, my sense that we are all unique embodiments of the mystery. We're all unique embodiments of the mystery, you know, of that creative principle, you know, and we're all unique, we're all different. That's a fucking miracle. We're 7.7 billion people, unique embodiments of the mystery, not to count about the billions of animals and plants and species that are also unique embodiments of the mystery. It's infinite, the creativity of the mystery, you know. So grounded in that kind of realization that you are a unique embodiment of the mystery, well, then you can say, well, what be attuned to what is unique path to unfold more fully that potentiality that you came here to unfold, you know. So that's a bit of where I was coming from with that. And of course, like Jung, in a way, even though he's known for psychological individuation, but all of you who study Jung know that for him, psychological, it wasn't just psychological, it was spiritual too.
Yeah.
So in a way, he was.
Yeah. Very definitely.
Yeah.
Jordi, okay, go ahead one more.
Yes. Jorge, I understand that you dislike strongly, as I do, mystification. Mystification.
What do you mean by mystification?
What the dictionary or Wikipedia means. Putting, say, the lust for mystery as breaking any balance of power.
Say that again. I want to make sure I understand.
I mean, the lust for mystery.
The love or the lust?
The lust. The desire for mystery.
Oh, the last for mystery. The desire for mystery. Got it. Continue, please.
The lust for the mismanagement of the lust of mystery. Now, my question, once mentioned that, is on ritual, on the management of awe, of wonder, of, if you wish, the liminal states. That's something that's not done alone. And in many ceremonies, you are blindfolded or are sense deprived of some sorts. I am thinking about Victor Turner, but I am thinking as well in the anthropology or Freemasons or Rosicrucians or all peoples who have a taste for rituals, which has been abused certainly by the perennialists or another. My point is a technical one. What's the merit of ritual practice, and to which extent can be democratic in your approach?
That's great.
Or that's an unsolvable problem. There is a tension always.
Yes, that's
good.
Go ahead.
I mean, organized, say, spiritual practices can quick you some miles sometimes. Even if that's not a ritual practice, you know, Big Mind or this type of psychological half zen of Genpo, etc. May have a point at some point, but there are dangers.
Okay, that's great. That's a great question. You know, like you probably know, mysticos, the original term, you know, meant to close the lips and the eyes, to close the eyes and the mouth, you know, but it wasn't really referring so much about esoteric knowledge. It was referring to ritual, you know, the secrecy of the ritual. My sense is like there are different ways, different motivations to keep certain rituals like private. I would prefer than secret, you know. And one of them, the most, you know, it has been power and the power of certain elitism and like self-inflation, and but also there is some rituals that I would say that there could be a more meaningful reason why some people want to keep some privacy around that, perhaps out of respect and protection for what they're doing, especially if they feel that the mainstream culture is going to very easily distort what they are doing, and they may want to keep it for respect for what they are doing, but also respect for that culture that will not understand. It's not a fear-based motivation; it's a respect motivation. That said, what I would say is like definitively we are witnessing a tremendous democratization of all rituals. What on the one hand, it's probably it's a good thing there. On the other hand, there is maybe a thing that could be question or could be like identified certain problems, you know. I'm mostly familiar in particular, I'm thinking right now, for example, in more shamanic rituals. You know, I'm a San Pedrista myself. I offer San Pedro ceremonies. I've been participating in many ayahuasca ceremonies in the different shamanic rituals. And you can see that on the one hand, there is like there has been like a globalization and expansion that has benefited many people, you know, and with many different manifestations of those rituals that have adapted to cultures in good ways to respond to contemporary concerns and to rectify biases of the culture, like patriarchal biases, for example. Many indigenous cultures are very patriarchal, and they wouldn't allow women, you know, to run ceremonies, or the women having menstruation, they would be kind of like in a corner or like somewhere else, you know. That's another story, you know. So there is a good thing there happening in that interface between contemporary spiritual culture and those. And on the other hand, of course, we all are aware of a lot of distortions, in the sense that that there is like some people with no preparation, that they, you know, they do a number of ceremonies and they start offering very powerful sacraments with not much responsibility, and there has been you know, a lot of people damaged, you know, from that psychologically, and even in some cases some deaths, you know. So the democratization of spirituality, I think, is very good in general. I think it's really good because it was kind of maintained by the elites, you know. The secrets, you know, was a power thing in many ways, you know, but also it doesn't come without its dangers and distortions. Thank you very much, Jordi. Great questions.
Thank you.
Good to have it's good to have someone from Spain in this dialogue.
Yeah. Thank you, Jorge. I want to go to my partner in this endeavor, Tim Holmes, to offer some thoughts, and then
I'm going to put a light here, okay, because it's getting
surely. Yeah, go ahead.
This is all better?
Yep, that is better. And then we'll come back to your numinous poem, which you concluded the book with, and I find very moving. And so, but first to Tim. Tim Holmes, go ahead.
Well, this is such a great pleasure, and this is a really broad conversation, and I just wish that it was not so rare. I would love to be able to go down to the coffee shop and have a conversation like this, because this is all stuff that we all need to talk about, and it is so rich and so deep. I'm very appreciative of your coming today, and I'm always amazed with the depth of the people who are involved in this conversation, and the new ideas and the different ways of looking at things. I'm of course full of questions, but we're kind of getting close to the curtain here, so I don't really have a question, but I just really want to thank you and to encourage the rest of us to really grapple with these deep issues and think about how in our own lives the numinous appears and what that means and how it affects our bodies, and all of the things that you've spoken of today are just are so rich and meaningful. And so thank you very much for being with us today.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Tim, for those very, very generous and kind words. And I wish there would be more time for some of your questions too, but I think we're kind of getting there.
Yeah.
Have a question, definitely through it. But thank you so much.
Yeah. Of course, in Jungian psychology, there's a lot of reference to the numen, which Rudolf Otto first spoke of, and the numinous. And in my lifetime, I find when I'm moved to tears by something, it's often because I find it numinous. And the coda to your book is very powerful to me. I've attempted to read it in the advanced reading group a couple of times, and I just can't do it without being moved to tears. I suppose this might be your problem too, but since you've given it to us in both Spanish and English, and as Spanish is a loving tongue, I wonder if you would recite it for us in both languages in the order you would prefer.
That would be my pleasure. Thank you so much. This is very touching. As you know, it's a poem written by my father, and yeah, as I wrote there, it helped me many times in difficulties. And so shall I read it in both languages? You want me to do?
Yes, please. Yes,
sure.
please.
So I'll, first, do you have any preference for the order, Spanish or English?
No, your call.
Okay, maybe I'll read it in Spanish first because it's its mother tongue, and then in English.
Yes.
I'm going to use my glasses because my eyes are not what it used to be. Plenitud. Si un día no me encuentras, no pienses que me he vuelto loco, sino cuerdo. Búscame lejos, donde las gentes vuelan como pájaros sobre los valles inmensos, donde los tristes escarabajos bañan su cuerpo de rocío y se visten de terciopelo negro. Búscame lejos, donde las vacas dan leche a cántaros y lánguidas ovejas se agrupan como nubes blancas, donde los bueyes te miran con ternura y los caballos de cola pacífica sienten la caricia del viento, donde mi frente descanse sin reloj que mida el tiempo, montaña arriba, hacia la luz y el silencio. Allí me encontrarás, tendido en la hierba, con la flor de tomillo entre labios, mirando al cóndor y a las águilas reales volar y volar. Allí me encontrarás, aprendiendo a vivir de los insectos y de las aves silvestres, de los animales domésticos, aprendiendo de los pájaros, y no me da vergüenza. Y puede que hasta aprenda el vuelo de las abejas, a dormir con las gallinas y a conversar con lagartos. Y respiraré libre al viento por los picos más altos. Oiré la voz que viene de lejos del campesino que canta coplas de amor a su amada y las campanas de bronce que suenan en el lejano pueblo. Oiré la voz de los árboles, de la brisa y del agua. Estrenaré ojos nuevos para mirar a mis anchas, donde cantan los grillos, donde duermen las cigarras. Y cuando tú me encuentres, besaré tu aliento con más calor humano. Y te contaré lo que me ha enseñado el viento, el día, la noche, la luz y las estrellas. Y aprenderemos juntos, de una vez para siempre, a vivir en paz con el sabor de los aires entre nuestras manos. Plenitude. If one day you cannot find me, do not think I have gone crazy, but sane. Look for me far away, where people fly like birds over immense valleys, where the sad beetles bathe their bodies in dew and clothe themselves in black velvet. Look for me far away, where the cows give milk in abundance and the languid sheep gather like white clouds, where the oxen gaze with gentleness and the horses with peaceful tails feel the caressing of the wind, where I lay my head down without a watch measuring the time, up the mountain toward the light and the silence. There you will find me, lying in the grass with thyme blossoms between my lips, gazing at the condor and at the golden eagles flying and flying. There you will find me, learning to live from the insects and from the wild birds, from the domestic animals, learning from the birds, and I do not feel ashamed. And it may be that I even learn to fly like the bees, to sleep with the hens, and to converse with the lizards. And I will breathe freely against the wind through the highest peaks. I will listen for the voice from afar of the countryman who sings love songs to his beloved, and the bronze bells sounding in the far village. I will listen to the voice of the trees, of the breeze, and of the water. I will use my new eyes for the first time to look as far as my gaze roams, where the crickets sing, where the cicadas sleep. And when you find me, I will kiss your breath with human warmth, and I will tell you what they have taught me: the wind, the day, the night, the light, and the stars. And we will learn together for all time to live in peace, with the flavor of the winds between our hands.
Thank you.
Oh, man, that's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Skip. Thank you.
So, Jorge, this has been an amazing conversation over many fields. I hope that you feel it's been useful. We've been referring to your book, Participation in the Mystery. I urge everyone to read it if you haven't read it already. And I hope that we can call upon you once again at some point. Obviously it's a very big ask to have someone like you speak to us, because there's so much here. And as I said earlier, we could have spent 2 hours on every page of your book. And so it's breathtaking to have you here, and I very much appreciate it. And thanks to Becca Tarnas for suggesting it. And so thank you again. And I would just urge everyone, especially those that are on the Zoom call here, to go to the YouTube replay and hit the like button. That will help us spread the word about this. We've had about between 40 and 50 people here between Zoom and YouTube throughout the session. So it's been well worth your effort, I think. Yeah.
Wonderful, Skip. Has been such a honor and such a pleasure to be here and to engage on this super thoughtful, and I really appreciated those of you who also share about your early childhood experiences, and I think this is part of the kind of conversation we need to have. Just yes, the theories, the conceptual, but also like grounded in our experiences. That's very meaningful, and so it has been very meaningful to me too. And the fact that you asked me to read this poem at the end, I'm gonna call tomorrow my father, who's still alive, and I'm gonna tell him about this. And you are gonna give this really great gift of joy to an octogenary man who is struggling in this moment of his life. I'm sure he'll cry too.
Yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure it's been very moving for most people here, just your appearance in total. But anyway,
Let me just add, if you have the chance to come back sometime, we would love to have you back.
Thank you, Tim. I would appreciate that. Very good. So I'm saying goodbye unless you have anything else. And saying goodbye to everybody here. And yes, please send me the link. I'll put it also on Facebook. And it would be good to share with friends and colleagues.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. You are just a really wonderful group here. And amazing conversations you guys have here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you
for putting this together, and everybody for being here.
Thank you, Jorge, for being here. So, adios, everyone.
Gracias, un placer.
Hasta pronto.